All right. I want to welcome all of our online viewers. Thank you for joining me tonight. Hope that this study continues to bring blessings to you. It's great to have everyone here. Those of you that are here, thank you for making the time to come and be with me here tonight. Even if there was nobody here, I know that I'd be teaching to a camera, that there'd be a lot of people out there watching. But it feels good to have you here, especially whenever I ask questions. That way I don't just talk to myself. And it's good to get your perspective. And I am going to be asking several questions tonight. I want to encourage our viewers online. We've got people that are monitoring and watching. If you have a question or a comment, please share that. We want you to connect with our class virtually. So make sure if there's something that the Lord puts in your heart to share, please do so that we can connect with you. We are in our series of amazing but true Bible stories, and can you believe it? We're already on part 4. I feel like I just started this, and we're already in part 4. And I want to thank Steve. You brought a great study this last week on the resurrection with no ending, referring to, of course, the amazing story of Elisha's bones bringing a man back to life. And so let's kind of do a recap here of what we did. The very first lesson was the sun standing still over Gibeon. That was Joshua's prayer, and the amazing story of how the Lord heard a man and his prayer, asking the Lord that the sun stand still so that he could finish the job to which God had given him, and the Lord heard that prayer. And so, of course, it's amazing because it shows you that no task is too hard for the Lord. The second one was a coin in a fish's mouth. And that was the story of Peter and how the Lord had Jesus had called Peter to go fishing and to go find a fish. And so that's an amazing story in many ways. And one of the things that I think it teaches is humility. He was really, I think, preparing Peter in a way to become truly a fisher of men. And then last week, of course, was the Elisha's bones. So this week, we are on part 4, and the title is The Writing on the Wall. Now ask yourself, have you ever heard that phrase? Well, you should have seen, or the writing was on the wall, or they should have known that the writing was on the wall. That's a popular phrase, an idiom. And that phrase originates back to the Bible. And a lot of people don't know that, but whenever you hear, well, the writing's on the wall, that they're actually quoting from an event in the Bible that we're going to read tonight out of Daniel chapter 5. And by the way, that painting that you see there, that's from Rembrandt. That's back in 1635. And so the story is well known and was told in many different ways. That idiom, that meaning of the writing on the wall, here's what it means. When there are clear signs or there is obvious evidence that points to imminent or inevitable disaster. So if you're planning something to happen or to do something, but then there are signs to show you that maybe you shouldn't do it, and it goes bad because you ignored those things, and somebody says, well, the writing was on the wall, but you went ahead and did it. That's what it means. Because in this story, literally there was writing on the wall, and the Lord had put it there. But the person who received it, again, failed to see. And so on the surface, this story, it really seems simple enough. When we read it, it's going to seem simple enough. I think most people would say that the moral of the story or the teaching is don't mess with God. And that's true. But I think that there's several lessons to learn from this story, and I hope you enjoy it. It's found again in Daniel chapter 5, if you have your Bibles, and it's split up, in my opinion, in 2 sections. It's 2 halves. The first section is verses 1 through 12. And verses 1 through 12 is the account of this man named Belshazzar. And Belshazzar is acting a fool. And as a result, the Lord writes on the wall to indicate his judgment over some of the things that he said and done. And we'll see that here shortly. And then the second half of that story is verses 13 to 31. And that's when the prophet Daniel comes into the picture. So the first half, Belshazzar is kind of like at the center of the story. And then in the second half, the prophet Daniel is at the center of the story. And so let me kind of give you some settings, some background, so that when we start reading, you won't be too confused. The setting here is ancient Babylon. And if you know your history, your Bible history, if you remember that in 586 BC, Jerusalem fell to Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and that God had sent prophets after prophets warning Israel to repent and change their ways, but they didn't listen. And so finally the Lord said, that's it, I'm done. And that he reveals to the people of Israel through the prophets that he has not only allowed, but he is ordaining the king of Babylon to do his will of judgment over Israel. Not because he hates Israel, but because he loves them. Because in that judgment, he's going to bring them back to him. So it's kind of like a rebellious child that refuses to listen or to do what they should be doing, and they're headed in a path of destruction. And sometimes when we try to help as parents, we're really not helping, we're enabling. Right? So let's say you have a child who's addicted to drugs, and they keep asking for money. Well, giving them more money probably won't help. It's probably going to make it worse because they're going to be using the money to go deeper and deeper into the hole. And so imagine, for example, they get caught by the police and they call and they say, hey, Mom, Dad, I got caught by the police. I was trying to steal a TV so I could buy money for drugs. Come get me. And the difficult thing for maybe a parent to do would be, no, son, I'm not going to come get you. In fact, I think you're exactly where you need to be. You're going to be in there, and I'm praying and hoping that in there you get clean and you come to your senses. That's kind of what God did with Israel. He allowed them to suffer the disaster of the Babylonian army coming and destroying not only the city, but the temple, bringing the temple down, reducing it to rubble. And the people were shocked. But they shouldn't have been, because for years and years, God had been sending prophets to warn them, but they would not listen. But just like God said, I'm going to allow this to happen, but it's going to happen for 70 years, and then I'm going to bring you back like a caring mother would. And I'm going to gather you again, and then you will once again be my people, and I will be your God. So that's kind of what happened in the background. So that is why Daniel is in Babylon, and that's why the setting is in Babylon. Because this story takes place after Jerusalem fell and the Israelites were taken as slaves. Daniel in this scene is already old. It's already towards the end of that 70 years. And Daniel's playing this role of interpreter for Belshazzar, and it's taking place right at the turn before the Lord brings them back home. So that's kind of the setting. And by the way, this chapter describes the end of the Babylonian rule. You're going to see this is how the Babylonian kingdom came to an end. And it's amazing in itself. And here's where the Medo-Persians arise. And that's important because the Babylonians had led them into captivity, but the Persians would allow them to return because their practice was to rule over people, but allowing them to stay in their own homelands. And so this change will not only be exacted over Belshazzar and using Daniel, but this will be exactly the change that's needed, the turning point that allows Israel to return home. So that's why it's important to history. Questions, comments before we start? How many of you are familiar with the story? Okay, several of you. Okay, let's go to Daniel chapter 5, and we're going to read verses 1 through 12. All right, this is the first half. It says, King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of the 1,000. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem be brought out, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So let me pause there real quick. Now they're calling Belshazzar here the king. And by the way, the name Belshazzar means Bel, protect the king. and Baal was their god, Baal, the god Baal, which is a demonic god. But he's called king here, but he's really not the king. He's actually what's called a regent. His father, Nabonidus, is king. So you had Nebuchadnezzar, who was the great king who had conquered, and he was known as the greatest king of Babylon. He's the one that destroys Israel and brings them back. Then after Nebuchadnezzar comes Nabonidus. Now he's called his father because anytime a king followed in succession, that king looked to any of those kings and called them father because they were their predecessors. So even though he's not literally Belshazzar's father, Belshazzar is next in line. After Nabonidus, he's going to be the next king. And that's why he refers to Nebuchadnezzar as his father. Does that make sense? So he's having this big feast, and they're celebrating, and they're getting drunk. And in this moment of bravado, he says, hey, go get all of those drinking vessels and all of the cups and everything that Nebuchadnezzar, remember the king that preceded his own father, go get all of those, bring them out here so we can use them to drink and party with. All right? Verse 5. Immediately the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. Now that lampstand was likely the lampstand from the temple. They had this big, it was kind of like the menorah, like this big lamp, and they were probably using it sacrilegiously. So the lighting was perfect for that plaster wall. Now here's something interesting. Archaeologists dug up that palace, and they actually found the throne room. And they actually found where the throne would have been installed in that whole banquet hall. And they found that there was this nice, beautiful wall that probably was laced with gold in its heyday. And the other walls were made of plaster. They were actually made of plaster, so it would have been like white walls. And notice what it says there. It says, and appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall. That's a very specific term. And recently they found this room, and sure enough, it was plaster. So that's interesting. Now, notice verse 6. Then the king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. Almost sounds like a cartoon figure here, doesn't it? The king called loudly to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. The king declared to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king the interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed, and his lords were perplexed. This writing would have been Aramaic. And Aramaic is an ancient form of Hebrew writing, which means only a Hebrew could read it. See how God's working? Now, verse 10. The queen, which is likely Belshazzar's mother, because of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banqueting hall, and the queen declared, O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts alarm you or your color change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, referring to King Nebuchadnezzar, which remember, his father, Nabonidus, is the actual king. He's the successor, but the one before his father was Nebuchadnezzar. Were found in him, and King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, and astrologers, because an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. So that's the first half. That's the first half of the story. So let's kind of go through some of these things. I kind of shared with you a few little things here. Again, he's the successor. He's going to be the future king. But I want you to notice where the foolishness of Belshazzar begins. I want you to understand that the reason Nabonidus is not there, his father, was because he had fled. And the reason he had fled this territory, this region, this area, was because the Medo-Persians were such a threat there that he thought it would be safer for him to rule from a different area, from a different region. And it's kind of like I don't know if you've been watching the news, Iran right now, there's that big revolution going on, which, by the way, all of a sudden nobody's talking about it, which is interesting to me. But with all of this happening, Khomeini, the Ayatollah, whatever, he escaped. I don't know if you know this, but he's ruling from outside the country. Same situation. It was so hostile, so volatile in that region that Nabonidus decided to do the same thing. So he was ruling from afar because he felt like it was too unstable for him. So he leaves his son, literally his son here, to rule and to stand as a regent as well. And here's where the foolishness begins. Because with the imminent threat happening with the Medo-Persians and all this stuff, all this instability happening, what does he do? What do we read in verse 1? He throws a big party for 1,000 of all of the wealthy people. Now that does not sound like the actions of a wise man.
In those types of regions, they have to display strength because they're not going to want to display weakness in front of the crowd.
Yes, and I think that's exactly what his motive was. That's a great comment. Marco mentioned that he likely wanted to display strength in those days. That would be probably what he would want to do. And throwing this feast, maybe he's trying to gain the favor of the Lord's. Yeah, to give this impression that they're prosperous. That's a good observation. So that's only the beginning. We already know the main stupid thing that he does. In the midst of this, he commands that the cups and the vessels that were taken from Jerusalem by his quote-unquote father Nebuchadnezzar be brought out. Now, even among the pagans, you did not do that. You didn't do that. Even the pagans knew, don't mess with other gods because they might be real. That was the idea. This was a highly polytheistic society. Polytheistic means the worship of many gods or more than one god. While Israel was a monotheistic society, the Babylonians were a polytheistic society. They had multiple gods. But even amongst them, they knew not to mess with that. Let me give you an example. Did you know, and most of you probably do, that there's a story where the Ark of the Covenant was actually captured by the enemy? Did you know that when I believe when it's like during the time of David, when David was king and so forth, when Saul was killed in battle, when Jonathan also was killed in battle, that they took the ark, it was captured and it was taken, and they didn't destroy it. They went and they put it in their palace, and they placed it next to their god, Dagon. And if y'all know the story, how many of you know that story? What happened the next day? What did they find the next day? Yeah, the statue had fallen over, and it looked like it was bowing to the Ark of the Covenant. So, yes, and so they put the statue back, but the next day, not only is the statue of Dagon again fallen over, it's been decapitated. And not long after that, the Ark of the Covenant makes everybody sick. They all start getting violently ill, so they try to get rid of it until finally they decide, we're going to give it back to the Israelites, and we're going to send like some offerings, some gifts, like, could you please ask your God to leave us alone and please forgive us for taking that? So that's an example of how even the pagans were afraid of gods. So even if somebody came in and says, I worship this God, in that time, in that society, they would say, well, maybe that God is real. That's the polytheistic thinking. So for Belshazzar to do this, even as a pagan, was absolutely ridiculous. It was stupid. There was no fear of the true God, because the fear of the gods was real. But what did they do instead in verse 4? They praised their own idols. Notice that in verse 4 they drank wine. And notice how Daniel describes them. They're gods, and I want you to notice how it diminishes. They praise the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So you notice that as it goes, the quality diminishes. So what you see here is them giving thanks to false gods while basking in the items that had been set apart for the true God. That's what Daniel is wanting to teach here. Questions, comments, or observations? Everybody good? 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 18 to 22. Now examine what Paul says here in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 18 to 22, regarding this description of these gods of gold and silver and bronze and so forth. It says, "Consider the people of Israel. Are not those who eat the sacrifices participants in the altar? What do I imply then? What am I saying? That food offered to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No, I'm not saying that these idols are real gods. I imply that what pagans sacrifice, they offer to demons and not to God. I do not want you to be participants with demons." So he's speaking to the Corinthians here. And Corinth at that time was a port town. It was a major city where lots of ships came in and a lot of trading came in. So people came from all over with their gods. And these Corinthians at the church said, well, I know that the true God is Jehovah God, so I know that these gods are not real. So they freely participated in some of these sacrifices, but they says, it doesn't matter, because they were wanting to be a part of the meat and, get some of the things that they were doing. But Paul is saying, be very careful, because even though we know that there are false gods, don't take it lightly, because when they do this, they're offering it to demons. Right? Now notice what he says next in verse 21. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. Now I want you to think back to what Belshazzar was doing. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. Think about what Belshazzar was doing. Shall we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? I think this is a perfect example of what happens to Belshazzar and all of the people there. Comments, questions, or anything before we continue? So I would say that what we're seeing here in them praising these idols that we know are just made of stone and wood and gold or silver is still demonic. That's what Paul is saying. In other words, you have a demonic man giving thanks to demons while using the items reserved for God. You're playing with fire.
Is that also like to when Saul, I think it was the Ammonites, and he had his war with the Ammonites, that God told him, you need to get rid of all their, everything of them. And of course he kept the gold and what for him.
Yes.
God instructed him, no, you get rid of everything.
Yes, fantastic comment. Philip mentions that, he goes, this is similar to when we hear the account in Joshua when they go into Ai. That's the name of the town, where that's the battle of Ai. Pending that battle, the Lord had instructed Israel, when you go in, destroy everything. Don't even keep the silver, the gold, cattle, everything, because all of that belonged to demonic sacrifices. In fact, that gold and that silver, it's not like today, it wouldn't have been in coin form. Now, there may have been some ancient coinage, but the majority of those were in idol form. And so, I'm keeping the gold, yeah, but that idol has been shaped in the image of a demonic false god. And God is saying, keep all of, don't put that into your... He's teaching them not to pollute themselves with the desires for riches, too. I think there's a spiritual discipline that he's enacting in the people of God here, and they fail the test. And, of course, the next battle, they fail because they don't succeed, specifically because God is weaning these people who had done that. So that's a perfect example here. God cannot endorse or bless anything that is not obedient to his will, once we start tainting it with the things that are not of God, we make ourselves unblessable. And that's one of the things that we hear Dr. Mark Brumbaugh talk about. You want to make sure that you're blessable. You want a blessing from God, make sure you're blessable. But if you're not living in a blessable way, don't cry or complain whenever God doesn't bless you.
And then also too, I think what also too what I noticed with this, these were sacred relics that were part of the temple. So these were holy, and then you brought them to this party, which obviously was no good, and now like it's blasphemous, it's sacrilegious, like what they're doing. So now you tainted what was good. Now you're really messing with the Lord.
Yes, yeah. And it's interesting to me that the Roman Empire, it was known as the empire that would never end at that time. They thought there's no way the Roman Empire can ever fall. But it's interesting to me that when they began to publicly humiliate God's people, they would burn them alive, they would throw them into the Colosseum and have them ripped apart by wild animals and all of these horrific things, that began the destruction and the demise of what was supposed to be the invincible empire. It fell apart from within. It rotted. And that was because I think that they were doing the same thing in many ways. They were by attacking God's people this way, a condemnation and a judgment fell upon them. And I would say that to any of these places where they're killing Christians, you think, oh, look, they're getting away with it. Nobody will get away with any of that. They will all face the judgment of God. Yeah, of course. I mean, what? How did that story end? You know, I mean, you look at well, yeah, but what happened to Hitler and the Nazis? Supposedly the invincible Nazi empire. Where are they now? You know, so yeah.
Would this also pertain to a story like the guy's name, Atkins or Akins sin? Like it's in Joshua 6 or 7.
That's what he's talking about. Yeah, so Achan's sin, Achan was the man who had taken those idols, and he was the cause for them losing the battle of Ai. So yes, so you connected the dots perfectly there, brother. So, all right, so as a result, now let's take a look at verse 5. That we're kind of going back again. Suddenly, the king sees a hand appear, and it starts writing on the wall. Now, I want you to compare verses 6 and verses 9. Notice verse 6. Then the king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. He sees this. Can you imagine this hand appear out of thin air, and it starts writing on the wall? I might be a little concerned, especially if I was doing the stupid things that he's doing. He's making fun of God.
So he would he have known, like, being that Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar, everything that happened with Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel and all that, and then also Nebuchadnezzar towards his end, after he went crazy, then realized, the true God, who God was. Wouldn't this person know, like, hey,
That, my friend,
you're not supposed to mess with this guy?
that, my friend, is perfect. That actually is the key verse of the entire chapter. The question that was presented is, wouldn't he have known? Wouldn't he have known the story of Nebuchadnezzar and all of the things that were taken, all these things? Now think about it. The great Nebuchadnezzar, think about it from his perspective. He's known as the greatest king of Babylon, right? And he's a runt at this point. He's a young, stupid, foolish kid. His father's actually king, but he's the future king. He's next in line. And the great Nebuchadnezzar had just preceded his father. Everybody knows the great deeds of Nebuchadnezzar. And even Nebuchadnezzar had not done that. He had taken those treasures and he had set them apart and knew not to touch them. Okay, so here's Belshazzar. He says, go bring me you mean the ones that Nebuchadnezzar even wouldn't touch? You mean those? Yeah. True. But I love this question that Philip asked, because he says, shouldn't he have known better? Yes, I'm not going to give you the verse yet, but when Daniel speaks to him, that's going to actually be the key verse of the whole thing.
Obviously, a lot of pride in this guy.
Yeah, a lot of pride.
He's third in line.
I think he wants to make himself impressive. He wants to do this. So you notice in verse 6, his knees knocked together, his color changes, his thoughts alarmed him. Now compare that with verse 9. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed, and his lords were perplexed. So compare the boldness, the arrogance, the confidence of the beginning of the chapter to now. He is completely terrified, and he does not know what to do, right? That's a drastic change in Belshazzar. But notice that whenever he sees this writing on the wall, notice after all of the fear and everything, notice that in verses 7 through 9, really through 8, he says, whoever reads this writing, show me its interpretation. Man, I'm going to clothe you with purple and have a chain of gold, and you're going to be the third ruler in the kingdom. In other words, he thinks he can solve his problem with money. Oh man, I made a major problem here. You know what? Whoever does this from here, here's all this money. It sounds a lot of times like, if you think about like the wealthy and the privileged in any nation, including our own, they do something terrible and they think that they can just hire a lawyer. A lot of times that's the case. There's injustice. They'll say, all I need is a powerful attorney. I can throw money and my influence, and I can get out of anything. And I think that's what Belshazzar thinks here. But all of the wise men are gathered, all of the Chaldeans, enchanters, astrologers, and nobody knows what to make of this. Nobody knows how to interpret it or understand it. And as a result, the queen, again, it's likely Belshazzar's mother, she comes to him, she goes, I know a man that can translate this. I know who can do this. But I want you to notice how she describes it, because what she says to him kind of speaks on what you're saying, Philip. Should he have known better? Well, notice what the queen says to him. Notice in verse 11, there is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, man, there was light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, he made him chief of the magicians and enchanters. You know all these guys that you gather that don't know what they're doing? Your father, your predecessor, the great King Nebuchadnezzar, he knew better. He knew, he could see the wisdom in this guy. He could understand who he was. And he made him chief of all these people, verse 12, because an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems were found in this Daniel. And again, let me remind you again, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. Now, what's she saying to him, whether he sees it or understands it or not? You messed up, okay? This guy, whom your father, she calls him the predecessor, right? The great King Nebuchadnezzar, he saw him and he knew who he was. And he made him the chief of everyone because he was that wise and knowledgeable. Where is he? Where is he now? You're the king. You're the awesome, almighty future of this nation. Where is he now? That would be like, and this is a terrible analogy, but forgive me. That would be like somebody coming up to Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys, and going, and this man named Jimmy Johnson, who was this great coach who led the Cowboys to 3 Super Bowl championships, who took one of the worst teams in the NFL and built them up into the most iconic teams ever built. That same man you let go because you were so prideful you couldn't share. You couldn't handle the fact that he was so successful and all of the attention went to him. Or imagine even worse, Jerry Jones, his son, takes over and he gets rid of him or puts him on the side. I know that's a terrible analogy, but I'm a Cowboys fan. You have to forgive me. That's actually a good one, right? Oh, thank you. But we look at that, that's my era. And I looked at that, and whenever he let Jimmy Johnson go, I go, how stupid is that, right? How much more this? Here was a man that the queen says, man, he had the wisdom of all the gods put together. He was greater than all of these things. And your own predecessor, your father Nebuchadnezzar, he saw it, he understood it, he appreciated it, and he put him right at the helm. So Nebuchadnezzar had the greatest wisdom guiding him in all of the things. Where is he, Belshazzar? Oh, that's right, he's not even allowed in your court. He's out there forgotten. Instead, you got all these idiots here. guiding you. And then we wonder why their nation is going to fall. You see that? So there begins now the second section. And I want you to notice one other thing. Notice how she greets Belshazzar in verse 10. O king, live forever. I'm gonna do a spoiler alert. Go to verse 30. Somebody read verse 30. O king, live forever. Somebody read verse 30 for me.
That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain.
Thank you. That's what we would call irony. So, and we'll get to that. I'm sorry. I just found that funny. O king, live forever. That very night he died. All right. So now let's go to part 2. Now we're going to go to verses 13 to 31. Everyone there? So they go and they get Daniel. He was brought in before the king. The king answered and said to Daniel, you are that Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king my father brought from Judah. I have heard of you, that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me to read this writing and make known to me its interpretation, but they could not show the interpretation of the matter. But I have heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretations, here it is again, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. I want you to notice Daniel's answer. Verse 17. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, let your gifts be for yourself and give your rewards to somebody else, to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. Before I continue, I have a question. I'm curious. Why didn't Daniel why is he, that's free stuff.
Same reason why Abraham rejected the offering that the king gave him.
Yes, great example. Same reason why Abraham rejected the offer. The king that you're referring to is the king of Sodom. When Abraham had taken the plunder, Sodom offers him. He says, I don't want anything from you.
Could this also be gifts from what we talked about earlier with the gold and the silver and the demonic?
Yes, I was just going to go to that. Y'all nailed it. I don't want your stuff. Your stuff is the reason why you're in the mess in the first place. You think I want it? No, thank you. No, I don't want any of that stuff. But nevertheless, I'm going to interpret it for you. You know why, Belshazzar? Because you need to hear what God has to say to you. And so this is where it begins now in verse 18, the interpretation. Now, I'm going to tell you this. This speech in verses 18 to 23, I think it's better than the interpretation itself. In verses 18 to 23, to me, is not only the central part of this entire section. Here in verse 22 is going to be Philip's answer to his question that I think is the most important question. Shouldn't he have known better? Didn't he know, what Nebuchadnezzar, his predecessor, why is he doing these things? Here is what Daniel says to him even before he interprets, and I think it's even greater than the interpretation. O king, this is verse 18, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar, your father, you notice the pattern? They keep going back to Nebuchadnezzar. He gave Nebuchadnezzar, your father, kingship. God gave that to him. The Most High God gave him greatness and glory and majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed. And whom he would, he kept alive. And whom he would, he raised up. And whom he would, he humbled. But, verse 20, when Nebuchadnezzar's heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened, so that he dealt proudly. In other words, he became proud. When he got arrogant and he started thinking it was about him, he was brought down from his kingly throne and his glory was taken from him. He was driven among the children of mankind and his mind was made like that of a beast. And I'll explain this a bit here shortly. And his dwelling was with the wild donkeys He was fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven until he realized that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind and sets over it whom he will. I'm going to stop right there. Okay? What's he talking about this thing with Nebuchadnezzar? Because I'm actually giving you two amazing stories here. This is the second one. Anybody know? When Nebuchadnezzar, if you didn't know, this is the second amazing part of the story. You're getting 2 for 1 today. So I do accept tips. This is the second amazing story. Nebuchadnezzar, the great king, goes mad. For 7 years, he acts like a wild man. So let's kind of pause right there. Go with me to chapter 4. And we're going to start in verse 28. So when Daniel is giving the story, the testimony of Nebuchadnezzar, this is what he's referring to. And I'm going to start in chapter 4, verse 28. One day, all of this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. He's walking around, and at the end of the year, he was walking on the roof of his royal palace. He's looking around, and man, he's glorifying in his majesty, right? And the king answered and said, this is verse 30, is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power, as a royal residence and for the glory of my majesty? That's Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Nebuchadnezzar forgot, because he knew, I can show you, but we don't have enough time. I can show you where the Lord speaks to Nebuchadnezzar, where Nebuchadnezzar realizes that he has been ordained by God I'm going to allow you to do this because you are an instrument of my judgment. And Nebuchadnezzar realizes that. And now here he is saying, look at me, at my majesty. Now notice verse 31. So this is Nebuchadnezzar. This isn't Belshazzar. While the words were still in Nebuchadnezzar's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven. O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has now, or has departed from you. And you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. Okay, you think you're so bad? You think you're so great? Well, let me tell you what's going to happen now. You're going to go live like a beast. And you shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and 7 periods of time, that 7 years, shall pass over you, until you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. Immediately the word was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from among men. In other words, he was driven mad, and he ate grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hair grew long as eagle's feathers, and his nails were like bird's claws. Okay, so and that's a historical account. For 7 years, I mean, the palace was going, and the people, and there was an area, and they said, "There's the king over there, running around, all his hair and acting crazy." I mean, think about that. There he is over there, and he'd run around like, "Oh, did you see him? Go feed him." Now, notice what happens in let's finish the chapter 4, starting in verse 34, and notice what happens to him. At the end of the days, this is now Nebuchadnezzar, he's giving his testimony again. He's talking again. He's writing again. I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. Oh boy, do you see the change in spirit? All the inhabitants of the earth are counted as nothing, and he does according to his will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. And none can stay his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" Verse 36, at the same time, my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom and my majesty and splendor were returned to me. God gave it back to me. My counselors and my lords sought me, and I was established in my kingdom. In other words, I was put back. In other words, one day he came back and they went, "Hey, the king has his mind back again." And he immediately took his throne again. And still more greatness was added to me. Verse 37, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven. For all his works are right, and his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. Now, side note, Marty and I have had this conversation for years, right, Marty? We wonder, was Nebuchadnezzar saved? And we've gone back and forth on that. There's a lot of debate amongst scholars whether he is or not. Me personally, I'm of the opinion that he was. I'm of the opinion, like, oh, but he was this. Yeah, he was a flawed man by no means. But to me, those words can only come by someone who has truly experienced repentance and a true realization of the true Jehovah God. That's my opinion. Now, if you don't agree, that's okay.
That of a king like him.
A king who had all this majesty and all of a sudden reduced, yeah, that can only come from a contrite heart. And that's somebody who's been humble. You talk about humble pie, that's humble pie. So here's the thing. Notice verse 22 back in chapter 5. I purposely stopped in verse 21 because I want you to notice what Daniel says to Belshazzar next. And you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled your heart, and though you knew all this. But you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house have been brought in before you, and you and your lords and your wives and your concubines have drunk wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold and bronze and iron and wood and stone, which do not see or hear or know anything, but the God in whose hand is in your breath and whose are all your ways you have not honored. To me, and that's why I loved your question, Philip, because, Mike, shouldn't he have known better? Yes. And that's exactly what Daniel says here. To me, verses 18 to 23, when I was reading this last night, man, I got so emotional because it's a reminder like, man, we cannot forget who God is. And you know, I had somebody mention this to me one time. It's like, because I keep saying that the preacher should preach the gospel. The gospel must be front and center when we preach. And I remember somebody saying this to me a while back. They're saying like, but we can preach about other things. Well, yeah, but the gospel must be front and center. Like, yeah, but people are going to get tired of hearing the gospel. No, they won't. I said, don't you ever say that. They kind of looked at me. I'm like, I'm serious. Don't you ever say that. That's a lie from the devil. Don't you ever say, oh, they're going to get tired of hearing the gospel. The gospel never gets old. The gospel never gets old. If they get tired of it or get bored of it, it's because you ain't doing it right. If you preach it right, man, not only will they not get tired of hearing it, it will fill their hearts with joy and gladness to hear it. Because when I hear, I don't know about you, but when I read what Nebuchadnezzar said here at the end of chapter 4, it's almost like the hair on your, it's like, oh man, that's the God that I serve. How can I ever get tired of that? So, to me, when he says to him, you knew all this, Belshazzar. In other words, he's saying, how stupid can you be? You knew the story. You knew the testimony of Nebuchadnezzar. You saw him running out there. You saw him like a crazy wild man, and you knew why. And you knew exactly why Nebuchadnezzar never touched those items. And yet you, in your foolishness and your pride, thought it would be so easy. You would extol yourself to do this after everything you saw Nebuchadnezzar go through. You knew better, and yet you did not learn. And to me, and before I continue, I started thinking about this. He failed to learn from history. He failed to learn this, right? And I started asking myself, what about us? Like, what about us as a nation, which is why I'm so glad that you said pray for our nation, hermana. I think of George Santayana. He's a philosopher, 19th century philosopher. He says, and you've heard this phrase, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Some of you have heard it this way. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it, right? So I started asking myself, and I want to just take a few minutes here. Belshazzar made a critical mistake that will cost them everything, you'll soon see. But I want to pause here before it continues, before we get to his interpretation, starting in verse 24, and ask, what have we forgotten? What history lesson have we as a nation forgotten? I want you to ask yourself that, because I really remember stopping here and saying, Lord, what about us as a nation? What history lesson can we not forget? And for me, one of them is the nations that acknowledge God prosper. And as soon as that nation forgets to honor the Lord or goes into it gets caught up in its own wickedness, will soon fall. And I fear for this nation. And I pray that we come back to a revival, because this nation murders more babies in the womb than any other nation. We kill more babies. We've killed more babies in the womb, over 1 million babies a year. Over 1 million. That blood is upon this nation. I say, oh, Lord, do something. Lord, Father, may you intercede. May this nation wake up and realize that blood soaks this land. And it's no different than when the people that were worshiping Baal, the Philistines, the Canaanites, when they were offering their babies at the temple, the altar of Baal and Molech. It's no different. We're still murdering these babies to the point now that people are convinced, oh, it's not really a life. And yet God says all the difference. And so that's just one example. And I look and I go, may our nation not forget where we come from, who we are. And I'm going to be talking here soon, beginning in February, of a series called A Letter to the American Church, and going from the angle of what if Paul wrote a letter to the American church? If he looked and he saw the churches here in America, what would he say to them? What would he write to them? So stay tuned. I'm going to be doing a series on that starting this next month. And I don't think it would be all that pleasant. And I think this would be one of the things that he would say. And so I really pray that we learn from this, because I think that that's a major lesson here. But that's enough of me. What do you guys think? Any lessons or any observations, brother?
It's forgetting the first love is where that's where we forget who our first love is that.
Amen. Hey, we have a great military, the greatest military on earth. But as soon as we start thinking that that's what we can depend on, we forget who we are. Yeah, so amen to that. So now let's get to the final section, verses 24 to 31. After he gives him this speech, and I think we all kind of see what Daniel is saying to him. You knew better, Belshazzar, and you failed to learn your history lesson. You repeated, and you made even worse a mistake. He says, then from his presence, this is verse 24, the hand was sent, and this writing was inscribed. And this is the writing that was inscribed: Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. Now this would have been written again in Aramaic. And he says this is what the interpretation is. Now Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin, they're units of measurement. They're units of measurement. And even if somebody could have interpreted it, they wouldn't have known what it meant. And he says, and this is what Daniel says. This is the interpretation of the matter, verse 26. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Because mene means numbered, counted. And he says it twice: numbered, or counted. In other words, he's numbered your days. Tekel, you have been weighed. That's what it means, to weigh. Tekel means to weigh. You have been weighed in the balances, and you have been found wanting. In other words, I've judged you, and it's not good. And then Peres. Peres means divided, but it also means another word, Persian. So Peres means either a Persian in Aramaic, or it means divided. And in this case, it applies in both ways, because notice what he says. Peres, your kingdom is divided. It means divided, and it's been given to the Medes and the Persians. In other words, your days are numbered. I have judged you and found you wanting, and as a result, your kingdom will now be divided. You've lost your kingdom. Then Belshazzar, notice what he does in verse 29. I want to get your opinion on this. Now, what would you do, before you read it, what would you do if you were Belshazzar and you heard that?
Yeah, immediately.
Repent immediately, right?
On my knees and sackcloth and just start turning away.
Notice what he does, verse 29. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple. A chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him that he should be third ruler in the kingdom. Did not Daniel tell him he didn't want that?
He did.
Did he listen? This boy does not listen. This boy does not listen. Come on, Belshazzar. That very night, verse 30, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So what you see here is an example. There's some people You just can't reach. You ever talk to somebody who wanted to share something, a wisdom of God, you wanted to give somebody advice, you're really trying to help them, and they just won't listen? And at some point you just go, Lord, I tried. And you just go, you know what, that's all I can do. And that's what happens here. Now, show the last slide, brother. I want to share something with you here. This is a painting by an artist named Benjamin West, and it was debuted of all years in 1776. And this is obviously, the painting is of Daniel interpreting Belshazzar's writing on the wall. Remember, 1776. Why is that date important? Yes, American Revolution. That's America. So Benjamin West was born in Pennsylvania, and he went to Italy to train to be an artist, and he was such a great artist that he became the personal historical painter to King George III, who was the king of England at that time. He exhibited that painting in 1776. He presented it to the king in the hopes that it would serve as a warning to a prideful king to repent and to listen. Isn't that interesting? To remind him. What he did is present this, and his prayer was, "Oh Lord, please let this convict King Henry, that he may listen and avoid what I know is about to happen." And just like Belshazzar, that boy didn't listen. And now we have America. So, what is the lesson here? The lesson is, of course, do not mock God, right? Galatians 6, verses 6 through 8. God will not be mocked, right? But I think there's actually a bigger one than that. So, yeah, thank you, brother. Let the one who is taught the word share all good things with the one who teaches. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that he will also reap. Oh boy, if Belshazzar knew. For the one who sows to his own flesh, to himself, to make himself, to his benefits, will from the flesh reap that corruption.
What I got from this Belshazzar, his thing was vanity. He was prideful. He was big on vanity. He saw things he knew better, and he still, even with Daniel interpreting the writing on the wall, still just couldn't get it.
You see, that's an important detail. The comment was, even with Daniel interpreting in it for Belshazzar, he still didn't get it. It didn't register because he had such a prideful heart. I think you're right, vanity. And I think, Marco, you may have mentioned it. Why would he do this? I think he wanted to prove or actually show himself to be greater than Nebuchadnezzar. He wanted to take out these things and to show himself, oh, look how courageous he is, but nothing but a fool. But I think there's another lesson here. And it's found in Psalm chapter 22, verses 27 to 28. See if you can figure out what other lesson I think we can take from this. Psalm 22, verses 27 to 28, and we'll end with this. Tell me why you think I chose this passage and what you think the lesson that we get from this. Remember, that very night, he's dead because the Lord had willed it so. Like, I'm done with you. And as easy as that comes to a close, the great Babylonian Empire, the one that had destroyed all of Israel and everybody was afraid of, goes out with a whimper. And the very next day, the kingdom of Persia exists. From one night to the next, an entire kingdom who had reigned the world is gone just like that. Notice verses 27 to 28. All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord. Didn't Nebuchadnezzar say this? And all the families of the nations shall worship before you. For kingship, true kingship, belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. And let me make it even more clear. For kingship belongs to the King of Kings, the Lord. And the Lord has set upon his throne the name above all names, and his name is Jesus. And he rules over the nations. To me, I think this is really a lesson that God is showing. This nation that had done so much destruction, had created so much chaos, for many people would have seemed like an invincible army, one that nobody could touch. God says, oh, you mean this one? Just like that. May we never forget this lesson.
It really you would think that, like what Bill was saying, you would think you learn from Nebuchadnezzar, right? Knowing that how powerful God is. And even the queen says that what's in Daniel is the most excellent spirit. Like, that's like a spirit above all spirits,
Yes.
per se, right?
Yes.
So all these hints are indicating, hey, knucklehead, there's a spirit that's like the most excellent spirit, right? Man is filled with it, and he's giving you the interpretation. And Nebuchadnezzar should have shown you that there's a king that's above you, right? All these small indications of this.
Yeah.
And when you're out there,
Yeah, just a complete ignorance of what was going on. So I'm going to close with, I'm just going to say a quick little note, because I know this is going to be recorded. And parents, if your kids didn't watch this, I want your kids to hear this part. I'm speaking to all the kids. If you have parents, kids, I'm speaking to the kids now and children, okay? There's a reason why God says honor your father and your mother. There's a reason why the Lord gives wisdom to the grandparents and the parents and so forth, because they have been given wisdom to guide you. And if you don't listen to the wisdom that your parents and your grandparents are trying to give to you, you're no better than Belshazzar. You're rebelling against the wisdom, not only of your parents and your grandparents, but the wisdom of God, because God has given them those things. Only fools refuse to hear wisdom. So I'm speaking to, whether you're 2 years old or whether you're 20 years old and you still have your parents with you, listen and be wise. And if your parents and your grandparents, your elders, even the elders of the church, oh, well, I thought I only listen to my parents. No, if the elders of the church speak to you, because it takes a community to raise children. And here in the church, there's wisdom. And for those of us who have been given the gift of parents and grandparents and elders in our life, people with wisdom, it does no good if we don't listen to it. It did Belshazzar absolutely no good. And the mother tells him, this great wise man whom Nebuchadnezzar realized, recognized, and put him right next to him to guide him in wisdom, he's not even here in your court. He had surrounded himself with fools. So to the young generation, be very careful who you surround yourself with and who you're listening to, because wisdom is hard to come by. And the wisdom of the Lord can only come by the Lord and through the Lord and from the Lord. And so I really want to encourage the younger generation out there, and I would say anybody who still has parents and grandparents out there, be wise and listen and accept the counsel. Even if you don't like what they tell you this because they love you and they want what's best for you. And if you're looking for people just to affirm everything you do, you're being foolish. True friends, true wisdom, true love comes from people that will tell you what you need to hear. So to all of the younger people out there, I'm sharing that to you in love. If your parents are frustrated with you because you refuse to listen, or if your grandparents are frustrated with you, or if you're constantly rebelling and don't want to listen, if you have to be told twice, then you're not listening to the words of God himself. So they shouldn't have to repeat themselves. And I remember my dad said, do I have to repeat myself? No, sir. Listen to the wisdom that's given to you, because that's what Belshazzar failed to do. And of course, such was his fate. So, all right. Well, again, I want to thank everybody. And that concludes our part 4. I think you're going to like part 5 too. I'm not going to tell you, but I'm going to encourage you to be here, because you're going to really want to be involved in the conversation. Part 5 is really, I doubt most of you here, well, most of you probably here have heard of it, but I'll be surprised if everybody has. It's a very unknown but very amazing story. So let's go to the Lord. Lord Father, thank you for this evening and all that was shared. I thank you for the wisdom that was shared tonight, Lord Father, in what we see here. And Lord, as Nebuchadnezzar, the great king himself, declared, Lord Father, you are the Father who guides all nations. You and you alone are the king over this world. And Lord Father, you humble the proud, and you bring low those who claim to be great in their own eyes. And Lord Father, you taught this lesson to Nebuchadnezzar, and you especially used Belshazzar as a lesson and a reminder to all of us. Lord, let us not forget our history. Let us not forget who puts us here, who gives us the breath, who blesses us with life. And Lord Father, I pray for this great nation that we may learn from this, and that the preachers and the churches and the teachers and all who declare your Son to be the true King, may we rise and may we have the boldness to proclaim that, Lord Father, only Through you do we find hope and a future, Lord Father, that you are a true King. We thank you for this evening and all that was shared. Bless us this week and all that we do, Lord Father. Guide us, protect us from the evil one. Forgive us of our sins and our trespasses, as we forgive those who have trespassed against us. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. Amen.
You think your belt is starting to